Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see a full hall here for a session that I promise will stir things up, navigating turbulence in the energy sector. If this is not an interesting time for the energy sector, I don't know what is. You could even say, in some ways, it's the best of times and it's the worst of times. Just consider the evidence. In the 90s, in the noughties, energy was considered a snoozer of a sector. Low oil prices, we counted on energy. Nobody thought much about it. You can't say that anymore. Every headline these days seems to lead with something related to energy. We have, after being the worst performing sector of the S&P Industrials, oil and gas has become one of the best performing sectors in the last couple of years after a decade of underperformance. We've seen on the renewable and clean energy side a massive expansion of solar, wind, batteries, electric vehicles. Perhaps 40% of new cars in China this year will be electric, and other countries as well. And we see something like $1.8 trillion invested in clean energy last year, surpassing that invested in fossil energy. So enormous dynamism on all sides of the energy industry. Sounds like a very positive outlook, but we are talking about navigating turbulence, and many of us will know. If you just look at the geopolitics, 2 wars in parts of the world rich in energy and with potential implications on prices, on markets. Europe is just coming out of a couple of years of energy crisis with a lot of reminder that energy security and affordability are as important as emissions and climate. That's posing a challenge. We see the challenge posed to the fossil industry from COP28. Gathered countries agreeing to move away from fossil fuels in an orderly fashion. What does that pose? What challenges does that pose for the oil industry, in particular, oil and gas? And of course, for the renewable energy industry, also represented on our stage today, the challenge is posed by success in a way, that scaling, supply chains, interest rates, inflation. This is not an easy time for wherever you are in the energy industry, and that's not even to talk about elections. More people will vote this year than any time in human history. And in a number of countries, climate, even a green backlash is on the cards, and energy, certainly, and energy security is a topic for the first time in many countries. And how will that shake out? And how do you navigate those shoals for this essential, vital input to the global economy, energy? To help us think through this, I'm delighted to have such a distinguished panel. Maybe I'll start with you, Henrik. Give us your perspective. It's very easy for us to be drawn into a US-centric conversation, so I'm going to ask my panelists, let's hold off until we get further down the conversation to discuss the US election, which of course is very important in this conversation on how to navigate policy and political turbulence. But give us your perspective from Europe. How do you see the turbulence that you are navigating? And as a developer of wind, you have certainly felt those winds, the headwinds.
Thank you so much, Vijay. And I didn't go out, even with your slightly depressive introduction. You know what? The good thing for us and being up here as a leader of a private company is I don't have to worry about re-election. And it also means that you have an opportunity to look into what's actually facts. And the truth of it is we got a levelized cost of energy that over a decade gave us all the good circumstances, all of the good evidence of that there is a build-out. Whether you're in Ukraine right now, some of the powerhouses that runs in Ukraine against the Russian intruder is actually turbines that were put there in the last months before the war really broke out. So I think in all of that, there's evidence that it works. We can scale it today. If you see in your good home here, IRA is in many ways battled in Europe as the one to blame for Europe's unfortunate situation of energy missing supply. The truth of it is, in Europe, we gave painkillers to 340 million people. We paid part of their electricity and energy bill. We paid the company's bill as well. We paid more money in Europe to compensate consumers for the energy bill that is paid here to build out capacity.
So you're taking the view that Europe's response to the energy shock that followed the invasion of Ukraine, which was broadly speaking providing a massive injection of subsidies, largely for consumption, and in many markets not really means tested. It was a consumption subsidy, that this should be weighed up against the IRA funds And therefore, those who say America is unfairly competing with all these subsidies, you are a rare European who says this. Now, in the political circles, that's not what we hear in Brussels or in European capitals.
And if you're Joe Manchin, you will know that I'm also saying it when I'm in Europe, and I'm still accepted in Europe. The challenge here, you just have to just look into the facts. And of course, we came out of a COVID, we came out of countries that were depressed. We were used to compensate people. And therefore, re-elections comes around in Europe. What's the first thing you do? You try to compensate your people that are going to vote for you. So therefore, we are way behind in Europe in demand and supply. You will be ahead and continue to be ahead with the build-out of renewable. It's not for free, but it's the right thing to do.
I'm going to come to our former senator in just a second, but just to stick with you on this, since you put the point on the table, it's now become sort of a point of conventional wisdom that America's policies are mostly carrots and Europe's mostly sticks when it comes to encouraging clean energy technologies. That would certainly seem to be the IRA approach, other than as sort of a token methane fee. There's no carbon pricing in America and so on at the national level. Do you broadly accept that that's true? And which is better for encouraging the development of technologies like yours?
First of all, I think look at the facts, look at what it actually costs without subsidies. And we got a previous person up here that also represents the UK. It cannot be that we sit here on the States and listen to that nuclear is a Hinkley, 15 years delayed in the UK, 220 pounds per megawatt hour in the sheer fly-in of the first kilowatt hour, when we then go and see that the renewable, both onshore and offshore in the UK, can be built at probably a third or fourth of that flying price. And it can be built tomorrow, not in 20 or 25 years. And this is about statesmanship. We have to talk statesmanship in this energy transition. This is not either or, it's both and. Because us out there as societies, whether we are developed or not developed, we need energy to run the societies.
All right. Mary, let's come to you. Now, you've fought these battles from inside the trenches in Washington. Now you're on the outside, looking at the same issues and working, I know, very closely with people involved. What do you see as where in this, again, turbulent era, we've just had a European say America's actually doing all right on energy policy. How do you see this perspective?
Well, of course I agree with him. No, I do.
Because I know I was just at CERAWeek, as a lot of us were, and there were a lot of complaints about U.S. policy at CERAWeek, I'll tell you that.
No, I'm serious. I absolutely agree with him. And you've put me in a great place, literally between the world's largest producer of wind and one of the largest producers of fossil fuels in the world, and I'm perfectly happy right here. Because this is what I'm doing these days. After leaving the Senate and running our committee, serving on it for 18 years and chairing it for 2, and I'm thrilled to see and very proud of Joe Manchin's leadership in the last couple of years. This is exactly where I should sit on this panel, because I've been spending the last 10 years, like Jason has built this group, all of us, and many of you have helped him, so congratulations. It's kind of phenomenal what he's done and his team. But back in Washington, I'm helping and spending a lot of my time building the center of energy policy to hopefully bridge over troubled waters, trying to build the left and the right center on an all of the above, let's roll up our sleeves and get to work and stop vilifying each other and stop yelling at the fossil fuel industry and picking winners and losers, and understand the world needs everything right now, all of it, and focusing on emissions. So I want to put a number on what Henrik said. He knows this number, but I want to make sure I say it to the record, and if there's a professor here that wants to call me down on it, please do. Europe spent $800 billion subsidizing their green transition. That's government money coming to the consumers, just like Henrik said. They're angry with the US because we took a different approach. I believe a smarter approach, a more innovative approach, a more capitalistic approach. And we spent $400 billion to accelerate, $400 billion to 800. We built capacity. We're building so much capacity in this country for everything, for wind, for solar, for cleaner gas, for smarter carbon capture, sequestration, and utilization, Companies from Europe, big industrial companies, are moving as fast as they can to Texas and Louisiana. Why? Because we have an all-of-the-above approach. Now, I don't want to be too critical of Europe. They're our best friends in the world, and we need them. But they have a path, and America's cutting a different path. Now, we have the same goals, adopted the same. John Podesta just told you what they were. But the United States is going to cut a different path, and I'm pretty sure about this. Very sure from a Republican point of view, but more and more encouraged by a Democratic point of view too. Because we want to be led by business, partner with government, not directed by government and dictated to our businesses. And that's a very different approach that America has than Europe.
How much do you think, Mary, since we're on it, is at stake in the elections? How wide is the variance on outcomes that we could see, depending on outcome here in the U.S.?
Well, I said I wanted to speak last about the elections. Since I'm a politician, I'd like the business guys to speak first. I have my own opinions, and you all know I'm a Democrat, so you can understand where my vote will be for sure. But I have issues with both parties on this. And Jason Grimet, who some of you might know, who's one of the best leaders, I think, in our country, who runs the American Clean Power Association, said it best. Our challenge in America is getting Republicans to understand science and Democrats to understand math. And that is a brilliant, and I have told Jason I'm using that in every audience because it sums up our problem in the US. Because this is both a scientific problem and an economic problem. And I am so tired of hearing government officials lecture to business people about the economics of this. Government needs to listen to the businesses, all of the businesses, little ones, medium ones, big ones, and explain the capitalistic system that we've all agreed to operate under. Maybe we want to change another system, but capitalism is what we've had. And so people have to make returns on their investments, and it's something I can't explain as well as these guys can, but some of you know this more than I do. But that is a difficult thing. It's not just the science. It's the economy, it's the economics of it, and it's the engineering. The last thing I'll say is this. I represent many different companies. I represent wind, I represent solar, I represent fossil fuels. But I'll tell you this, and you all know it, I don't have to say it. The best engineers and geophysicists and scientists, some of them are found in the traditional fossil fuel industry. If we'd stop yelling at them and listen to them and respect them and say, yes, we all made a lot of mistakes in the past. Yes, some of you have been dragging yourself, not doing the right thing. But y'all are smart. Help us figure out, you got it out of the ground, you put it in the atmosphere, help us get it out of the atmosphere and figure out what to do with it that makes economic sense. Now, if somebody here wants to give charity and send a gazillion dollars to all the countries and you have enough money to do it, go ahead. But I can't go to my constituents and ask them to pick up that tab. I got unelected one time, I can't get unelected twice. So, this is the truth, so.
Maybe just a quick
well,
one
but
here.
let's give our other participants a chance. All right, so you're staking out your middle ground, both physically as well as
yes.
maybe
I'm
in
right
politics
between
and
the two of these,
your
yeah.
efforts now in Washington. You want everyone to be your client, I guess, nowadays.
My two best friends.
Right, exactly. And you make the point we should focus on emissions, not on source of fuel, which fits your all-of-the-above strategy, as well as trying to talk about the technical expertise traditional oil and gas industry has, geologists, seismologists, modelers, engineers, and so on. Those points are well taken. Scott, you've worked your entire career in the shale patch, in the energy industry. We're now seeing some efforts at Oxy and others to do things like direct air capture in the shale patch. I was at No Trees, Texas, at the opening of that carbon engineering facility that Oxy's invested in. They claim they're going to build dozens and dozens of them. There are other efforts, Exxon as a low-carbon division. Some people see this as greenwashing, putting lipstick on a pig. I imagine your perspective is a little different. Can you make the case for why we should take Mary's argument seriously, knowing that there are probably people with tomatoes outside that door ready to come on stage? So be persuasive here.
Thanks, Vijay. I wish we had more people like Mary in the Senate. So it was sad to see you leave, but I came back 5 years ago, as most of y'all know. It's been very turbulent, the term you used. And so we both had the investors upset with us, and we had the environmentalists upset with us. So we had to tackle the investors and the ESG movement. So Pioneer, we led the capital framework change for the investors. Instead of spending 105% of every dollar we produced, we spent 50 cents of every dollar we produced. And we gave back about 50% back to the investors.
This is the mantra
in
of capital
buybacks
discipline,
and
right, that we've seen.
And that's why you said we were the worst performing.
Right.
But I want to add 21, 22, we are the number one performing industry in the S&P 500.
Right.
We're leading today, barely. Last year we were back to the bottom quarter. So we've turned the corner in the industry from an investor standpoint. From an ESG standpoint, Pioneer was focused on exposing the issues in the Permian Basin. And that was CO2 emissions and flaring, number one. Number two, methane. So it was a black eye for the Permian Basin, probably the largest oil field. When you add up all the NGLs, natural gas, and the oil, it's the largest oil field combined between the two basins in the world today. And it saved us from $150 oil today. Can you imagine if we didn't have 10 million barrels a day of shale and 80 BCF a day of shale gas in this country? So we focused on emissions. We focused on emissions.
Aren't those two things in tension, right? Because one of the storyline out of the shale patch, aside from coming to grips with the methane problem, which you talked about, we can talk additionally, but is capital discipline, right? A lot of money was burned through back in the early days of shale. Investor discipline, CEOs had specific targets, they gave a lot of money back and they didn't develop every barrel that they could. But now what we're seeing is actually U.S. oil is riding high. We're seeing output go up even more than predicted. Efficiency gains, a lot of reasons that explain this. North America and even Western Hemisphere is in effect riding to the rescue of the global oil markets. Part of the reason why we have the kind of oil prices we have is the surge in Western Hemisphere production, including in shale. Does that mean capital discipline is out the door in an age of geopolitics? Well, I want to link it back to the theme of our panel here. How should we think about America's shale patch in an age of complicated Middle Eastern geopolitics?
Well, I've been too public on this in the media, including the Economist. Even if oil gets to $200, I'll say it again. I said it a year and a half ago during 22. The independent producers are going to be disciplined, the public ones. It's different from the privates, but the public producer is going to be very disciplined regardless. They were in 22 when oil prices got up to 120, 125. And if something happens today with geopolitics, they're going to be very disciplined.
So does that handicap the idea, or does that sort of diminish the idea that America has an antidote to OPEC or to Middle East turmoil, right? If we can't turn on the spigots in the shale patch because of capital discipline, because of the behavior of the producers, even though it's short cycle oil, does that mean that maybe we are more vulnerable than we think to global oil markets?
Well, I can say one of the big benefits of I can't talk much about the merger because it's still under FTC review, but one of the big benefits with Exxon is that we were only growing at 5% per year. So Exxon's going to take Pioneer's assets and grow 10 to 15% a year. So they stated a target to go from 1.3 million barrels a day to 2 million barrels a day by 2027. So that's an example where somebody's stepping up, a company's stepping up and adding production at this point in time.
Lorenzo, let's come to you. Thank you, Scott. You have a global perspective. Your company has clients all over the world. You told me I could see you in Houston, I could see you in London, I could see you in Florence when we next meet. So clearly, you have a visibility into a lot of companies. Can you give your sense of this moment in geopolitics and how it affects the way that the clients that you deal with, energy companies, how are they navigating this? What are the perils that you see in the C-suite?
So it's great to be here, and it's great to be on this panel because, as you said, you've really got the collective of what's necessary to give answers to these questions when you think of renewables, policy experts, producers, and at Baker Hughes, we're an energy technology company. And at the end of the day, the solution to all of this comes down to, through turbulent times, you need to be able to have a sustainable energy development plan that comes through the introduction of technology. And that's what we at Baker Hughes do. And so if you think about it, we know a couple of things are true. Energy demand, irrespective of turbulent times, is going to continue to increase. We have an appetite for energy that's insatiable. Even in this room, we can't help ourselves but consume energy. And we've got increasing populations. We also know that climate change is a reality and that we need to reduce CO2 and drive the climate change aspects. We also know it needs to be affordable and efficient. And so technology is paramount to being able to do that. So what do we do as a company, and how do we enable as we go forward? We navigate by making sure that we're having a sustainable development plan to be able to provide the affordable, sustainable, secure, and also efficient technologies that enable the continuous production. And I'd go back to what Mary said.
Are you suggesting that that kind of bet on technology, including the decarbonization technologies, is maybe somehow geopolitics proof or election proof, that through the cycles you can ride this out? Or isn't it heavily dependent on policies, for example? If the IRA were to be stunted or reversed, you'd have a lot smaller market for your decarbonization technology, surely.
It is and it isn't, because if you look at history, and history is a great way of showing the way elements have occurred in the past, we know that the energy mix is going to evolve and it's going to change. We know that there is a desire to move the energy mix to a lower emissions energy mix. That doesn't mean we stop fossil fuels. It means we reduce emissions. Carbon capture can become affordable, just like wind turbines became affordable, just like solar panels became affordable, just like we moved from wood to coal. And I think the evolution of the energy mix is through technology, and that's been proven before and will be proven in the future. What enables it to go faster is the right mix of policy, the right mix of pragmatism, and what's disrupting right now is some of the turbulence. But will it stop the outcome at the end? No. We're headed there. It just can be enabled and it can go faster and it can be smoother. But we are going to shift the energy mix over the course of the next few decades. It's just going to take a long time. And we've got to ask ourselves the question, how do we want to make that energy mix go faster or slower as we go to that future? But the technology will be there.
Right. Now, the sense of urgency is one that perhaps is what's at stake here. We heard the head of the UN FCCC say a few days ago, we have 2 years, in effect, to save the world. Now, I think he was using his platform for some rhetorical effect there, but certainly what he was talking about was the national commitments need to be much greater in ambition if the goals of the Paris Accord are to be even within sight, which is not the case today. Mary, you wanted to jump in on this specific point about technology and policy.
I just wanted to follow up on what Lorenzo said, and we've heard it on the stage all morning. This is inevitable. The world has decided. The world has been, and this is a great tribute to all the environmentalists. Phil Sharp, you're sitting there. You are one of the leaders in our nation. We honor you. The environmentalists have done an amazing job broadly helping the world understand what the challenge is. Now it's the engineers that have to get to work and figure this out. And we need all engineers from all different backgrounds and all different companies to figure that out. And if we're thinking about capitalism, which is still most of the world, not all, and if we're thinking about democracies, most of the world, not all, and there's some fragile issues right now we could spend all week discussing, but we'll leave those on the table. You have to do this in a way that the public will accept, because the public votes for the politicians, whether they're the Green Party, the Red Party, the Blue Party, the Yellow Party. There is no authoritative, except maybe if you're in China or in Russia, you could make decisions kind of quickly, like they bulldoze cities in China and build X. Could you imagine trying to take a building down, one building, forget the whole community, in the Bronx, without asking people if it's okay if you took their building down? I mean, it's just a complete, so I beg all of us, yes, we have only a few years to get this done. That is true. But if you don't listen to the public and be sensitive to what they will pay, how much they will bear, explaining the trade-offs to them, you'll get such a backlash. We'll go backwards and not forward. So that's all I wanted to say. And I just want to say one more thing about the IRA. The IRA, Europe started down their path of green, green, green way before Russia invaded. Maybe they thought Russia would invade, I don't know. But if it wasn't for American gas and for their willingness to take it and our ability to produce it, we would have a completely different situation. And if it wasn't for the shale revolution, which gets no credit from Democrats, so I want to give them credit. If it wasn't for the shale revolution in Texas and Louisiana and all the basins we know and the oil shale revolution, I don't know what the price of gas would be for us to get home today. If you might have an electric car, your electricity price would be higher, or your gasoline. Think about it. With Russia invading Ukraine, Israel being attacked right now, Yemen Straits getting blown up, what do you think the price of oil would be? You know why it's steady and stable and we don't have riots in the street? Because of the shale revolution.
So,
and
Mary,
all people can do is yell at them, and I've kind of, wanted to calm everybody down and say, look, these guys are producing the energy. You may not like all the bits of it.
You're not running for office anymore.
No, I'm not. Never again. So never again.
Old habits clearly die hard.
Yes,
as
sorry.
The great senator from the great state has just spoken. So yes, the U.S. owes a great debt to the shale patch. I think it's been paid today on stage. But Europe also for those freedom molecules more seriously. And it was Donald Trump's administration that called LNG exports molecules of freedom and was widely ridiculed at the time, including by some in this room. However, that's actually what did transpire when Europe got into crisis. Now, I want to pivot with the time we have remaining. Where the rubber hits the road is where money meets markets. And so, Henrik, I have a question for you. Your industry and your company has run into some challenges in the last couple of years. They're well advertised, including this part of the world. How much can we say that the golden age of renewables was the artifact of free money, that is, of low interest rates, of incredibly cheap capital, and that now that that age is over, we're going to see, who's, as Warren Buffett said, who's been swimming with no clothes on, and it could very well be your industry.
I think the right quote on that one is the empire didn't have any clothes on, actually, from that poem. But I also say here, I don't think it's a necessary a sign of health when you across capacity and energy assets get, I call them dreamers coming in and trying to build out because capital is for free. Whether it's in renewable or it's in any other assets, it's actually not great. It also has one other downside to it is that extend those graphs where we all look towards the levelized cost of energy. And some of those levelized cost of energy graphs were actually pointing towards zero. And guys, whatever we say, wherever we are in the world, energy can never become for free. Because the value of energy, if we just look across the world, the societies that keep benefiting from that, it should never become for free. And I think a couple of notions here is, it is, as today, even though that the levelized cost of energy has come up, because part of it is the interest has come up, there is an underlying inflation, whatever energy asset you are establishing and constructing. That's actually fully recognizable. We just don't like it as a consumer that some of the things we normally saw that was cheaper now becomes more expensive. The only thing I will encourage is that when we have elected people looking at things that change in pricing, they are willing to adjust it. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. If you want to have a 30-year asset to just increase it with 10%, why not? Because if that's the going rate of building new, adjust it and do it. Otherwise, we don't play by the rule. And therefore, the most of the things where you're saying the golden age has come, that's because some of the projects were caught at factors where there was a different calculation. If we let that decide on the success of it, no way. The one thing all I will say also is, science, math, please don't lie with it. Because if we look at the capacity and the targets right now, come on, the 2030 goal, it's not going to happen. I'm sorry, if you calculate the thing, there is no way the renewable sector can ever get permitting in place to have that build out for 2030. It's not going to happen. So your 1.5 degree is gone. It's gone. It's not possible. In Europe, there's 5 years of renewable capacity stocked in the permanent backlog.
You make an interesting point. Let me ask on this panel, hands up, how many of you think 1.5 degrees is still achievable based on policies in place and what industry is doing today? Hands up.
By when?
50.
To maintain, let's say by 2030, but to maintain within 1.5.
1.5 in 2030, hands up.
Hands up. How many in this audience think we will be able to achieve the ambition of the Paris goals, keep within 1.5 degrees of warming through and beyond 2030? I see a couple of hands in the back. How many of you think that is not feasible? That's not realistic? Okay, so this is a room of realists, right? This is very different than the same poll in Dubai that I conducted over there, where they're still struggling at COP to keep 1.5 alive. So
But I have a government that
But hold on,
traveled to Dubai and said, we will convince the world to triple in renewable. They put one turbine up in the whole of the year 2023.
So if we're going to be realistic about, right, exactly. This is so a part of the contribution, I think, of this conference, which I appreciate every year, is energy realism and having eyes wide open, saying that climate change is real. We need much greater ambition, but sticking to canards and shibboleths doesn't help. So in a world in which we have these difficult challenges, how do we make progress more ambitiously? This is a question for the panel from the floor. That's why I'm turning the conversation to this. We'll start on that end. And if you can choose to answer that specifically, and including the role of China is also asked to the panel. I'll put a sting on that question. Do we need to allow in China's inexpensive clean energy supply chain if the world is to achieve those ambitions, which does not seem to be the case at the moment? We'll start down there. We'll make our way here. Short answers, please. We just have 4 minutes.
So
go.
I'm an optimist by nature. And if you look at China, they are very good at their 5-year plans. They've stated 2060. Do I think they'll meet their goals by 2060? I do. Do I think that we've got new technologies on the horizon that can be breakthroughs? Direct air capture can be a game changer, and it can be a solution. CCUS is a solution.
So you're saying things developed outside of China can help us achieve the ambition. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and I think China, within its own, will actually stay committed to its goals of 2060.
Scott, to you. How do you answer that question? How do we raise ambition?
I've been fighting our energy independence for 50 years since I've been working. We finally achieved it in the last 2 or 3 years.
And you want to keep
I'm a firm believer when it comes to minerals, whether it's EVs, hard mining, lithium, it should be made in this country.
Let's keep those high-quality, low-cost Chinese EVs out of my front yard. That's your policy.
Yes.
Okay. Mary, what do you say?
If they get achieved,
just clarify,
yeah.
Mary.
I think this is a very complicated answer because I could really argue both sides of it like any good politician could, but we need the supply coming from China, but we also need to build our own capacity in the country, and in our country. And there's the rub, because if you shut it down too hard, we can't build the renewables we need, and the EVs we need, and the batteries we need. But, we don't want to be completely dependent on China. So it's a very complicated, I hope somebody at Columbia can figure it out and send me the memo.
Okay, new research project for Columbia.
Yes.
What do you say, Henrik? Obviously in Europe, also the same debate is there on the role of China, although they've struck the balance differently at the moment. Where do you come out on it?
I think the world has become exceptionally complicated, and I think a lot of people have forgotten how we created our generation's wealth. And I think that was by trading with each other. I think today we are trying to polarizing that. Every country or every part of the polarization have their own stakes right now. I think we have to acknowledge that the energy policy today, from just to board being very cheap, has now become with a word called independency in it. And therefore I think most regions, areas, EU, US, other large industrial nations would probably prefer to have an independency in their energy supply, of which then brings back a little bit to the German representative on the former panel. You cannot rely and throw your destiny into a one man's hand, turning up and down a tap in Russia, because if you do that, then you are in a pretty shitty situation when the hand turns the other way.
even with higher costs, a slower pace of accomplishment, you think that's the way forward? That's pretty clear.
We have just been asked, our generation now, what's the price and cost of independence? Sure. And I prefer to have my independence.
That's the mood in Europe for sure. We have 1 minute left. I have one question, lightning round from the audience. And I want a one-sentence answer, even better, one-word answer. Would you support a carbon tax, Lorenzo?
Yes.
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 Okay, well, here we go. We have, and as I've advocated at The Economist for 20 years, yes, we'd like a carbon tax. A group of energy, brilliant people here. Thank you for my audience. Thank you for my panelists. We appreciate it.